Hey everybody, I want to talk about a product and platform that I absolutely love and our latest sponsor, Interseller, the prospecting and outreach platform of choice for recruiters and sellers. Whether you're doubling down on business development or recruiting talent, Interseller does all the heavy lifting of finding contact data, automating the email and follow-up process, and syncs all that rich data into 20 plus CRM and ATS platforms. Reach out now and get going on a 2-week free trial and let them know you heard about it from Adam on the podcast today. Check out the link on the website. Appreciate it.
Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast, where I bring you the best and the brightest from the world of business, marketing, and entrepreneurship to help you harness your inner tenacity and drive your career forward. My guest today, Ashish Toshniwal, CEO and co-founder of Y Media Labs, and for today we're going to call it YML. YML is an award-winning digital product and design agency that was founded in 2009, just as Apple was opening up the App Store. And at the time, Ashish and his co-founder saw an opportunity to create a future-forward company that help brands win in a digital world. YML has worked with over 30 Fortune 500 clients, including Apple, Home Depot, a little company called Meta, and State Farm. And prior to starting YML, Ashish started out at Dell and eBay, where he worked as an engineer and a manager. And his focus on bringing Silicon Valley to the world began here, and he's been working with cutting-edge brands and companies ever since. He's also an accomplished investor, with some of his key investments including People AI, Latch, Robinhood, Acorns, and more. So let's get under the hood and scope out the why behind Y Media Labs. Let's do it. Ashish, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you so much for joining me today. We had a very lively conversation about kids and COVID and this crazy world that we're living in, but we're going to save all that for another conversation. So you have a pretty fascinating story. So let's hit the rewind button, and I would love to talk about your journey, from growing up as a boy in India to migrating to the States and coming to university here. What was that journey like? Did you always, from a little kid, always said you wanted to come to the States? Or, when you were growing up, did you have plans to stay in India your whole life?
Yeah, it's like I grew up in Kolkata, India, probably one of the most populous cities in the country. And growing up, it was a pretty happy-go-lucky childhood. And I also remember I came to US before I came to US for my undergrad. And I was in New York. I was in the bus, and this was in the 90s. I got my hand on a newspaper, and I was reading, what does an average engineer makes in America, right? And it was like $57,000.
And back then, that's a ton.
And back then, given, my background and, always lived in India, I was like, wow, if you make $57,000, I'll retire the same year or something. And
one and done.
And that was obviously a big lightning moment. And then second was also I wanted to be in engineering, where, what's the place to be in if you want to make a big name in tech and so on and so forth.
Interesting. So you came to visit, and how old were you when you came to visit?
I was I think 16 years old.
Got it.
And I would say even before that, right? If you look at my upbringing, I would say the first 10, 12 years, we used to live in a joint family. So right. The idea of a joint family is my dad lived with, his brother and their family, right? And it was a total of 15, 16 people in the same house.
Like a tribe. Yeah.
And there was one bathroom amongst 15 people.
Imagine that.
I remember we would have 15-minute slots in the morning. And if you miss your slot, man, screwed. Life is hard.
You're literally shit out of luck. Sorry, there's my dad joke for the day. I got my dad joke out of the way there. But let me ask you this: what did looking back on it now? You're in the States. It looks like you're in a much larger house than you grow up in. What did that teach you? Right, living with 15 people deep in your family under one roof. How'd that prepare you for
See,
now?
one of the things, like when I look back, obviously it sounds crazy, but when I was in the moment, I was not like, man, my life is miserable.
No.
I was actually enjoying it, and it was a lot about like the positive side was having fun, with my cousins, and it was a big
You're
family, and like I was never bored, and constantly entertained, and like that's what I guess the focus was back then, and it was, I think the key thing when I look back was even in that situation, I never felt like my upbringing was miserable or anything.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't you because you also didn't know any better, and you were happy. You were happy. It wasn't like you were miserable. You were in a good situation there. So let's talk about it, right? Like, and I'm a recruiter by trade, so I work with a lot. Well, in the past, I've worked with a lot of, people coming from overseas with visas and everything. But hit the rewind button, and obviously transferring over to the States is incredibly difficult in different levels and different roadblocks. But talk to us a little bit about that experience. Was it an easy one for you? And you came over to come to Purdue, correct? So a
Yes.
student visa. How was that process?
Yeah, I mean, that process was actually pretty challenging where, if you come to US for your undergrad, especially if you come from India, the fees, number one, you don't get any financial aid, and the scholarships are very minimal, especially in the undergraduate space. And I remember, like, for me, coming to US it was a stroke of luck more than anything else.
How so?
Like, because like my dad and the whole family, they were not sure. There was like a window of 2 weeks where, one day I was like, I was going, and the other day I wasn't going. Obviously, I wanted to go, but it was not just my decision.
Why? What was the hesitation from your parents? I mean, didn't they want to see you flourish and grow and expand past your boundaries, your geographical
I think
boundaries?
there were two hesitation. Number one, it was a lot of money. It was for 4 years. And then when you compare that with like Indian education, it's like, a 0 to 100 kind of comparison, right? And the second was like, they were not sure if I am ready yet. They were like, why don't you go for your master's? Maybe this. My mom was definitely a lot more certain than others, but that was the thought.
And you wanted to just jump right in. So you already been to the States. You fly in. I assume you flew into probably JFK, and then you took another flight over Chicago. But you've been to because you're right over there, and you're in the States. What was the first real culture shock going to university? Right. I mean, listen, I should have asked this like coming to New York when you were 16, right? And you're on a New York City transit bus. But what was that first cultural shock? Coming to university in the States with it's a different country, different folks around you.
I think the biggest culture shock was I never was in this environment. Like I never saw snow before in my life.
We take that for granted.
And I landed at Purdue, and the first semester was so rough for me. Like I took on like unnecessary too much course load, and then getting accustomed with the culture. And before coming to America, I never cooked in my life. And, getting used to all of it, it was very challenging. In fact, like, I remember like after Thanksgiving, it was so cold in Purdue. That was the first time I experienced negative 22 degrees with the wind chill.
Chicago's Arctic.
And I was like, there's no way I can stay here for the next 4 years.
Why didn't I choose a Southern school or California school, right? It's funny. I went to school up in Buffalo, and I'm from New York, so I'm used to cold weather in the seasons. But until you're in that belt with the Great Lakes, because we were on one of the Great Lakes up there, you have no idea what that whiteout conditions are and what real cold is like. And it goes through your bones, right? And especially a kid growing up in a warmer climate, right? Your bones weren't used to that.
Yep.
What was
the wind chill is crushing, man.
What was your favorite U.S. American meal? Like you're like, oh my God! I mean, God, I was missing this my entire life.
I loved pancakes and waffles. It's like I had that for the first month or so. I had that for my breakfast. I had that for my dinner. And then of course after like few days I got sick of it. but it was amazing. I mean, I have a very big sweet tooth.
All right. So let's get into it. So you graduate Purdue, and what was the first stop? Was that Dell?
Yes, Dell was my first job right out.
Was it your target? How did you land there?
So, I was actually wanted to move to Silicon Valley right out of college. I couldn't get in.
Well, you wanted to warm up also. I mean, it's not much warmer, but it's and you heard the pancakes on the West Coast are significantly better. Those West Coast pancakes.
That is so true, actually. Like, I loved my time in Austin. In fact, Austin is the perfect city awesome. When you want to transition from college to real life.
It has a little bit of a college feel to it in a lot of ways, right? Go down to South Congress, right? I mean, they got some good stuff going on over there.
That's right, 6th Street and, all the fun. So I got my first job as an engineer in Dell Computers. I was in the storage and servers department writing.
Pre-cloud. Pre-cloud.
Yes, this was pre-cloud, yes. And, working on firmware and working on a lot of like application, server application stuff.
Interesting. Right. So then Dell, what was like a key learning, at Dell? Your first real job in the real world, big giant company, one of the big boys, Dell. What was something maybe you had a preconceived notion of that got proven wrong in the workplace? Something that you learned the hard way?
Yeah, I think one of the things for me was that I wanted to, progress fast. And I remember I was working on a product which was kind of end of life. So, this was never talked about in any all hands. And it was, nobody kind of ever cared about this. And I was like, man, I'm kind of working on the wrong stuff here. So I wanted to get on the product, which was cutting edge. Of
course.
And how can I, and I didn't have any problem putting in 70, 80 hours. In fact, I was itching to do that if I could see I'm making a difference.
Of course. Interesting. What was the move over to eBay like? Were you poached by them? Were you looking to go over there because you weren't getting something at Dell? You weren't working on those high profile cutting edge projects?
Yeah. So my number one objective when I was working at Dell was how can I move to the Silicon Valley? I remember talking about learning about YouTube in 2005 was probably the biggest acquisition ever back then, right? 1.6 billion by Google. Everyone
now they spend that on an app that's 2 months old. It's crazy.
It's insane, man. And I used to listen to Reid Hoffman. I used to listen to all these entrepreneurs. Of how did they make it, how did they start, all that stuff. And I was like, I don't care what job I get, but I have to be in Silicon Valley because that's how I can enhance my chance of starting a company someday.
It's really interesting. Let's kind of ruminate on that for a little bit. The idea of being where the action is, right? Of being where it is. And that was, I still think it rings true now, but what we learned in the pandemic in the last few years is you could kind of be and work anywhere. Do you still kind of have that same thought? Because I still believe that, hey, listen, the pandemic came, but you need to be where you are. For example, if you really want to be deep in the crypto Web3 space, Miami's the spot right now. You know what I'm saying? To physically be there. What are your thoughts on that, out of curiosity?
Yeah, I remember I was in an event last year. Someone asked me, hey, how do you enhance luck? I was talking about luck was a big part of, my journey. And I had to think about that. And I would say the number one reason how you can enhance luck is, luck is directly proportional to the kind of people you meet. And, when you talk about coming to Silicon Valley, you're enhancing your chance of serendipity, running into people who can change, the course of your life. And that's what happened with me, early on. And that's what happens. If you want to make a mark in a certain category, then you have to surround yourself people who are really good, in that subject.
That's such a good point too. And I don't want people to lose track of this as we're kind of heading down this path of work from anywhere, be anywhere. If you're passionate about something professionally and personally, put yourself where the action is. That's great advice, Ashish. Be where the action is. Be where those people are. you have more of a chance. I mean, let's just think about it logically. You could literally be getting lunch in a coffee shop, and you're surrounded by 10 people who are key influencers and decision makers in your industry. And a casual conversation, you have a better chance of a casual conversation turning into something or not. And you're actually manipulating the luck. No, I love it. So let me ask you this. When did you have the first bug, the first itch to start your own business? Was it when you were at eBay? Like, when did you say, you know what, I have an idea, or you know what, I'm done working for other people. It's time for me to go out on my own.
I think the first time was at Dell. At Dell, we tried to, like Sumit, who's my co-founder at YML, we tried to do a deal search engine. We launched it, but it never took off. And then, we tried another venture. It never worked. YML was kind of our third shot.
Yeah.
So, we tried a bunch of things, but YML was kind of the third experiment, which worked.
Interesting. So let's talk about your co-founder, Sumit. And correct me if I'm wrong, you actually grew up 2 miles away from each other in Kolkata?
Yes. It's
coincidence.
It's
and you met at Purdue, right? So it's pure coincidence.
Absolutely.
Did you know him growing up? Did you know him growing up, or you didn't know him until you got to...
I did not know him growing up. In fact, the first time I met him was at Purdue. Despite like living 2 miles away from each other for 12 or like 18 years, right. So yeah.
What was the process like? Were you friends first, or were you looking for a co-founder?
Definitely friends first, because I remember like I met him in the freshman year math class in freshman year. And, it's like he was from Kolkata, I was from Kolkata. And we were like, wow, can't believe. Because not a whole lot of people actually go from Kolkata to US for undergrad. So it was kind of like surprising that we met in college. And, obviously back then I was not thinking of starting a company, but just trying to excel in math, I guess.
No. So how did that decision come when it was time to start a company? Was he the logical choice because of your closeness of culture and where you grew up, or were there other qualities and traits that he had that make him a desirable co-founder, or a mix?
Something very interesting happened in Austin, by the way.
What happens in Austin stays in Austin. We don't always talk about what happens in Austin, man.
So we interned together at Dell Computers, and then we got full-time job in Dell right after graduation. And then, Sumit moved out to Austin first. And I moved to Austin as well, but he didn't know that I was coming to Austin. And I called him up after I was in Austin. I was like, hey, Sumit, I'm in Austin. You want to grab dinner or something? He's like, oh, yeah, where are you staying? I'm like, Warner Ranch. I am also in Warner Ranch. Which apartment? I talk about the same apartment complex.
No way.
And then, he asked me, Ashish, what's your apartment number? I'm like 933. He's like, just step out of your apartment.
No.
We both step out of our apartment and we share the common wall. And out of like 900 apartments in that apartment.
The entire complex.
Yes.
That is a brilliant story. I love it. So let's go to the early days, those days of brick by brick, building it together. What were some of those early sacrifices that you had to make? I think it's important to share these stories.
One of the biggest challenges we faced when you start a company in March of 2009, that's like at the bottom of the last financial meltdown. You don't have a whole lot of help. Obviously investors are super skeptical to invest in anything. And then, we didn't have any great background in entrepreneurship, or like our track record didn't speak for our, great success or anything. So we had like 21 rejections. And we were like, after like a couple of years, we were like, fuck it, man. Like, we just need to bootstrap it. We need to figure out how we can do things. So we started like hiring, in India as well back then, just to make sure we can like the money can pay for the whole operation.
Of course,
Sumit moved himself to India, and then we were like gradually bootstrapping it, and in fact, like it took us literally like close to 4 years to cross $1 million in revenue.
Right. So it's not an overnight success as what everybody sees out there by these unicorns that are just getting these insane evaluations. I mean, those only represent, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to make a stat up here, like the smallest 0.001% of all startups out there. right? You're not just going to crush it. You're not going to be the unicorn out there. So let's talk about getting an email from Steve Jobs. First and foremost, I need to ask you, like, is his email address literally like Steve S or Steve at Apple or S Jobs? Like, was that literally his email address? Or did he have some crazy encoded secret email address?
No, you would be surprised that like Steve Jobs used to download pretty much like almost all the apps, because apps were not that much, right? In 2008, 9, it was a new thing.
Yeah, it was early days.
And when we launched one of these early apps, we partnered with the Montessori school who had all the content and the, understanding of what is required for kids. And we brought this to iPad. And this was the first time through touch kids can learn, right? And it's very interactive. Like the iPad is talking back to the kid, giving instructions.
I remember those.
And it was a very clean app, and we got this email out of nowhere. I love what you're doing. Let me know how I can help. Best, Steve. And obviously, when we got the email, we were like, "There's no way, someone is playing around with us, And then we kind of responded back that, hey, we are getting a lot of backlash from the Montessori community, that like people feel that this can hurt the kids because it's
screen time,
it's electronic and it's against the Montessori school of thinking and all that. And his response was, keep doing what you're doing. You'll prove the critics wrong. And obviously that was very inspiring in the middle of like so many investor rejection and so on and so forth.
So let me ask you this. Do you have that letter like printed out in a frame?
I have that letter. Absolutely, man.
I mean, that's inspiring, man. I love it, right? Because they're still regular people and this is their business and they're still engaging. No, that's a great one, man. So you mentioned this early app. What was the first big project that really changed the trajectory of YML and pushed it to the next level? How did that happen?
See, I would say that very early on, the first business which we got was from Safeway. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if have you been to Safeway?
I live in New York. We don't really have a Safeway.
Okay, so probably you've not.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah, I know what it is. But for those, grocery, right? For those not familiar, it's a giant grocery chain, right?
Yeah, it's especially on the West Coast, right? And when you enter, like you see a whole rack of gift cards. And their idea was, how can we bring gift cards on the phone on demand so that when you are on your way to a birthday party, you can, while you're in the car, you can buy the gift card. And that was kind of like our first real project. We did a bunch of like small things back then, but that was kind of the first one. And then I would say the biggest first win was, and that came few years into YML, was like working with PayPal.
And what was that project?
Well, PayPal obviously is a giant in the whole fintech world.
Of course.
And they started in the web world. And the trajectory of iPhone progress was so fast that, Facebook came out like, oh, Facebook is no longer a web company. It's a mobile first company. And PayPal was like, okay, we need to do the same. And we need to make sure that our mobile roadmap is very strong, app is very strong. And because iPhone technology and design was so unique, right? Like in that early days, very few people actually knew, how to build an app on iPhone and what does an iPhone app design look like.
Yeah, it was uncharted waters. It was brand new.
Exactly.
It's like now in the metaverse. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And hence we that was kind of our big project, like launching that, big first PayPal app.
I love it. Hey everybody, first I'd like to thank you all for spending time with me and my guest on the podcast. This show is my canvas to showcase amazing people from the world of recruiting, entrepreneurship, and leadership and unpack their career journeys for everyone to learn from. But this show is also a business generator for me, as well as creating thought leadership and endless amazing content. And I've taken what I've learned in the past 3 years and over 200 recorded and 100 live shows and distilled it down into a digital playbook that I call the Pause Course. Now you could learn how I build, manage, and produce the podcast and use it to drive real business development and relationships. Today, I'm sharing all of my secrets behind the podcast, and you can get it all at thepodcourse.com. This course is for anyone, whether you're starting out or an advanced podcaster using it for B2B and B2C. It's filled with all of my insights, learnings, tips, tricks, and templates. So get it now at thepodcourse.com and learn all my secrets. Thanks. So, quick side question here, and I wanted to get to this later on, but what is, like, your kind of hot take on the Web3, blockchain, crypto, NFT space? Is this a fad, or is this the next generation? I mean, is this where we were in 1999 when people were saying the internet was a fad? Is this like, hey, get on with the program, the world is changing, just take a look at what the kids are playing and stop being the old man at the room saying, why the hell are you spending $3 million on a JPEG of an ape?
See, here's the thing, Adam. This is obviously highly controversial, and here's my take on it. It is absolutely early days for it, but at the same time, I never predicted that kids would be spending close to, not just kids, but people would be spending close to $40 billion today on virtual goods.
Yes.
I have personally spent $0, on virtual goods.
What about your kids? Your kids aren't playing Roblox or any of the other things?
And here's the thing. My 8-year-old, if he had disposable income, he would spend all his money on virtual goods. He plays this game Brawl Stars, yep. and in 3 months, if I buy him that $499 special sword, he is so thrilled.
A pig and shit.
And I can see this is the future, right? Today it's happening. Now, if you fast forward 20 years from now, 10 years from now, right? Especially when your online presence surpasses your physical world presence in the meta world. Today, it's what we wear and the shoes we wear or the shirt we wear, the glasses we have, it is a slight part of our identity. We are definitely making a statement with that. But in the online world, it would be the online identity we have and the stuff we own, right? If we have this special hat or special sword or something environment friendly, that shows what we stand for. Because in that world, we are not necessarily looking at your shirt or shoes or your glasses. So in that case, it can be, I can see this can be a pretty big thing when NFT can be a part of people's identity.
Yeah, that's a tremendous take there. So let's talk about the current state of your company. How many full-time employees do you have, may I ask?
Yeah, we are close to 550 people.
Wow. So this is a sizable organization. And correct me if I'm wrong too, you started to think about DE&I pretty early on, being a minority founder and having faced, a lot of discrimination regarding certain opportunities in your life. What is your position within your current company? When you launched your company, what was that mission to say, you know what, we're going to put, true diversity and inclusion in the forefront in all of our hiring practices? So,
to be honest, Adam, early on when I started YML, I didn't realize how big this the significance of DE&I is. I was just focus on hiring, build great products, build the company, and that's all, right? And I remember around 2013, 14, I was called out, in all hands, Ashish, if you look around the room here, there may be 40 people in the room, and do you want to guess how many women were there in the room?
2, 1. Yeah, that's
right.
A problem.
And I was wow, shit. This is not good.
But it wasn't intentional, right? Or was that a bias, or was that a function of women in tech at the time, a lack of women in tech?
I think it was a little bit all of the above, but it was I'm going to blame myself more than anyone that I didn't have that awareness. And then, after that, we worked for 2-3 years to change that. And our whole strategy was, how can we hire women in the leadership, in the more senior position, so that, the whole company is kind of represented of what our leadership represents.
Right. But it wasn't just hiring women for the sake of women to check a box. I mean, you still needed to ensure that they were skilled, experienced, that they would be a good addition to the culture of the company. And how'd you go about doing that? I mean, you growing as a leader, talk a little bit about your story of growing as a leader and being able to interview and build culture and affect change?
I think when it comes to like D&I particularly, it was a lot about, hey, let's make sure this is part of our company goal. The way you would track revenue, the way you would track customer satisfaction, you are tracking, what is the percentage of women, and I made that as a goal of the leadership team. And that's when I think we did well. And today it's like close to 40% of YML is women.
That's fantastic. So let's talk about how you interview. And I love to give a little bit of inside baseball, pull back the curtain here. So I assume when someone gets to you at this stage, you have a 500-person company, that they've at least been vetted from a skill and experience perspective. But what are some of your go-to questions to really try to suss out, is this person going to be good for the company? Do I feel like they're a good human being? What type of questions do you ask?
Yeah, one of the big things, Adam, for me is that I want to look at the track record and I want to see how they have dealt with very, very difficult situation. And the way I look at it is like someone, who has not been at a company more than 1.5 year, it tells me let's say over a 10-year period or 15-year period, right? It tells me that whenever like there is probably a very difficult situation, they want to bail out and they want to jump onto the next, job. And now, of course, job market is so hot that it's not that hard to find a job, right? And what I look for, especially for senior roles, is that can they tell me a story where they joined the company, where the company was like, let's say 50 people, but when they left, it was 500 or 1,000, and they can track a story of how they have helped, build the company, and in the process, obviously elevated their career as well. And if I can, believe that story, then that's a very strong tell, in my opinion.
What's a red flag question that you ask?
A lot of times the red flag question is in the details, right? Like if someone says, hey, I've done that, then I would get into, how did you do it? Like, tell me the details. And if they are still keeping things at a very high level, they're trying to, come up with things on the fly rather than tell you the truth.
Or maybe they didn't do all the work that they're claiming to. That's an interesting one. So let's talk about the last couple of years. What percentage, like prior to the pandemic, prior to March, February 2020, how much of your company was on site versus, people working remotely around the country and the world?
So pre-pandemic, I would say like 95% of the team were on site, and we had 4 to 5 offices.
Wow. So how did let's go back to those early days of the pandemic. What was that first moment you're like, shit, this is for real. We gotta figure this out. We gotta get people, was the company set up to easily transition to fully remote?
Oh man, I remember like, it was like March 1st week or something. We were like, you're on
the West Coast. You got hit first. Yeah.
Yeah. I called the E team. I was like, look, this thing can get out of control. We need to do a pilot. Okay. Even though like nobody, and that day it was not like, 10 companies announced we are going remote or something. We were like, we should be prepared. Let's just in the next 24 hours, make sure that we have all the systems ready so that we can communicate remotely. If we don't, let's just do a pilot for 1 week and see how it goes. And then we did that pilot, and that pilot has been going on even now. So it's like now after that moment, we have been remote first. And I would say on the business front, the first 6 weeks to 8 weeks were extremely painful and challenging because every client of ours was also in a big shock because they didn't know what
they were going through it. Everybody was.
And depending on the nature of your business, let's say if you're in restaurant business, literally overnight, your revenue has dropped by 90%. And when that happens, like it is a sign of existential crisis. And at that point you are not like thinking about digital design or like experience. You are like thinking of like making sure your lights are on.
Yeah, we're going to have food.
And that, especially in travel and restaurant and, that category got hit pretty badly. And we had a few clients there. So, they kind of like we need to pause everything overnight. And all these calls kind of came in a 2 to 3 day window. And I was kind of projecting that if this continues, like in the next 2 weeks, we may not have like any business, if
That's
this
scary.
is what
This is
happened.
reality. It was literally out of a movie, right? It was literally out of like one of those crazy Matthew McConaughey movies. Matthew McConaughey is going to come save the world. It's a virus.
It was like that.
So how did you keep the company together? How did you keep the sense of culture and mission and purpose remotely, right? Like when we take it for granted, right? We take it from like, we see each other walking down the hallway. We're able to pull somebody into a quick meeting, pull them into a hallway and have a conversation with them. That's part of the culture. How did you keep that vibe alive to really keep YML? Like how'd you keep it going?
I think there was also a big panic amongst the team. What's going to happen to them? Like, obviously, people were scared of, and also, the first 6 months, I think there were a lot of news of layoffs and this and that. So people were scared of like what's going to happen to their job. We called an all hands probably 2 weeks into the pandemic. I communicated like what is happening, the clients who paused. I also communicated this is a rough time. And, at the same time, I also communicated that, look, we are not like laying off anyone right now. The next 8 weeks, we are going to just, get closer to the client, make sure we can help them. Because in pandemic, fortunately, the kind of business we offer helps in social distancing.
Yeah.
You can order things online on your phone, you can experience whatever you have to experience through, digital means, which is what was needed in pandemic. And what we saw after 8 weeks, clients literally doubled down on all their, digital initiatives.
Oh, I know it. I recruited in the digital marketing space. I saw it. My business flourished during the second half of the major part of the pandemic.
Exactly. So, and then we were like, absolutely, we are not just lifting our hiring freeze, but we are like going all out, I remember the Q4 of 2020 and it ended up being a pretty massive year that year and then last year again.
Yeah, that was a big one. I remember that. So hopefully we're recording this mid-February 2022 and hopefully that this podcast stands up to the test of time, but hopefully we're on our way out of this. I think we are. I'm very optimistic about it. For you and your company as a leader, what is the biggest challenge ahead of you as you continue to grow and expand?
I think one of the biggest challenges, like how do you make sure that you can keep, a remote first culture and at the same time be connected? I feel there is a big challenge around when you don't meet people in person, there is the Zoom meetings by nature are transactional. Yep. You don't do like Zoom meetings just to hang out. No. I wish, because they
had that idea at the beginning, right? In the beginning, they're like, hey, let's just Zoom each other. And I even saw some companies, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Some companies like, why don't we just have the Zoom on while we're working throughout the day? I'm like, screw that shit. I don't want to look, like, I don't need you like walking me like I'm, fixing myself and picking my nose and everything. Get away from me. See me walking away to the bathroom in my shorts. Come on.
I totally agree with that.
Flushing the toilet, right? You don't need to hear that in the background.
Depending on, what your personal situation is, I think people are going through different, life events, right? And I think as a company, we have to be very empathetic to everyone's situation. Exactly. And, we are also making sure that we are meeting people. We are creating those moments where teams are coming together in person and they're not just like for months and months just zooming in and out. They are meeting the clients in person. Good. They are coming together, brainstorming, all those things we can have in person, doing offsites. So things like that has been pretty big.
Wait, so you are getting people back. And I think that's a huge point too, is creating an environment where people feel safe. And those people that don't feel safe for whatever reasons, and you have to respect that. And I love that you're saying that as a leader, that there's not one solution for everybody. Right? It's not black and white. There's a lot of gray. So we have the office open. If you want to come in, come in. We're facilitating meetups. We're facilitating and encouraging, client travel if they're open to it, but also being caring and empathetic to those who may not and not judging them or holding it against them. Have you found any performance-related issues to people that are not open to returning to being together?
I think more than the performance related issue stems from psychological change. It's like people who are lonely, and if they're going through tough life events,
you don't know what's happening in their house.
Obviously, there will be performance impact.
Right.
But I don't think it's because they're remote. It's just because some things are changing personally. Like even in a in-person world, right? Like if you go through a personal event, it is going to impact your performance.
Yeah, it's interesting
so
too.
That's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, we think about it. I think that there's been a lot of blanket statements out there about how work from home, work from anywhere is the future. But I think that's a little selfish because I think there's a lot of people out there that don't have great work from home setups. Maybe they have, they're single parent with 4 little screaming kids running around the house, and going to an office was their escape to work and be productive. And now they're stuck with their kids. That's not productive. Or maybe they live in a rural area where they don't have great internet connection, and it's a major pain in the ass for them. These are things that we just assume as a white collar privilege. I get that sense.
I absolutely agree with that. In fact, we leaned in more, for mothers at YML who have small kids on how we can help. How do we make sure that, if they have kids during meetings, it's fine. How can we be flexible with them? And things have been great. Like we actually pride ourselves that like YML is the place to be if you're you have young kids.
I love it. That's huge. I mean, that's what it's all about. So let's bring it home here. What does the word authentic mean to you?
Well, authentic means, that's a great question, is when you think something and that's what you say, and then that's what you do. And if you can align all the three, that's authentic.
Mean what you say and say what you mean. And I love that. That's a good one. What is the single greatest piece of advice that you've ever received, not from Steve Jobs, that you take action on every single day?
I think, this was, I'm a big fan of Charlie Munger. He's the business partner of Warren Buffett, and he has like dropped a lot of like life wisdom. And one of the things he says that, and he's like 96 years old and, super wise guy. And one of the things he says that, at the end of the day, you're going to get what you deserve. And every day in the morning, you have to slug it out and you have to make small progress. And after a few years, you get to see the real result. And that has been very inspiring for me. And if you look at, this is my 13th year running YML. It's like the definition of long-term thinking.
Long-term thinking. I mean, that is something, we could spend a whole other podcast talking about that. And, I see this every day. I'm a recruiter, so I'm talking to candidates at every different level of seniority. And there's so many that are so short-term, they're transactional, and they're going from job to job just to make more money and get a title, where there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I always say, listen, stick it out a little bit longer, like dig your feet in. You're only getting started there. And I think that needs to change. Yep. So Ashish, last but not least, right? You think about, the tough times, you think about that journey coming over to the States and acclimating to a new country, a new culture and everything, working your way up through a founder. You needed to have a compass. You needed to have your sights set on something to pull you in the right direction. And on the flip side, sitting at our conversation now, 13 years, building an incredible company, 500 plus folks there, building a fantastic culture. What keeps you in focus? What is your guiding light? What is your compass? Ashish, what is your North Star in life?
I would say today, it's a lot about how can I build a legacy? And, when you think of that, you're thinking beyond yourself. You're thinking, way out in the future, which means how can you take some bets where the chance of success is probably less than 5%, but you're still going for it, because if you're successful, that can be world changing.
That's big. And I love that you left it with legacy, because I think that's what it's all about. And I talk about this all the time. What is your legacy? And for me, it's leaving this world a better place than I found it, with my kids and my company and all the good that I leave there. Ashish, thank you so much for joining me. I want everyone to check out yml.co, but where could folks find you directly and connect with you best?
I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That's the best.
That is the best. So hang with me one moment here, dude. I appreciate it. This was a great chat. And anyone out there, please, if you really love this conversation, please sure to share it, leave a comment, connect. It goes a long way. And hey, guess what? If you have any questions, email me, Adam at nhptalentgroup.com. I want to open up the channels there. Feel free to reach out to me. I could connect you directly. Remember, find out more everything podcast related at thepodcast.com. Follow us on other social media channels. Remember, take care of each other, look out for one another, and catch us next week for another great episode of the podcast. Take care, everybody.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search the podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.